Elite bully lifted a simple woman's skirt at a gala, but what her husband did next left him begging for mercy. She stood there, frozen, her hands clutching the hem of her cotton skirt as laughter roared around her. Sophie Allen's face burned, her cheeks flushed with shock and shame, the sting of humiliation cutting deep. The elite crowd at the gala, draped in glittering gowns and tailored suits, pointed and jeered, their phones flashing like vultures circling prey. Max, a cocky rich kid with slicked back hair, had just yanked her skirt up, exposing her to the room, his smirk wide as he shouted, "Let's see what this plain little girl wears underneath." His words echoed cruel and careless, as if her dignity was just a toy for their amusement. Chloe, the influencer queen with 1 million followers, live-streamed the moment her voice dripped venom. "Guys, check out the maid's outfit of the day." Sophie's knees trembled, but her eyes stayed steady, a quiet fire flickering beneath the surface. In that moment, with the room spinning and the laughter deafening, no one could have guessed that within 60 seconds, the man who owned the entire venue, her husband, would walk through those doors and turn their world upside down. Hey, if this story is grabbing you, take a second and pull out your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment about what's hitting you hard, and subscribe to the channel. It means everything to us, and it keeps these stories alive. Let's walk through Sophie's journey together. Okay, back to the gala. The event was a dazzling affair held in a grand Manhattan mansion turned high society venue. Its chandeliers cast golden light across polished marble floors. The air buzzed with the clink of champagne flutes, the rustle of silk dresses, and the hum of self-important chatter. Fashion influencers, tech moguls, and old money heirs mingled their outfits in a parade of wealth and status. Each glance is a silent competition. Sophie, in her plain midi skirt, flat black shoes, and simple braids, stood out like a shadow in a spotlight. She'd come as a part-time event assistant, her job as a grad student barely covering rent. Her face was bare of makeup, her presence quiet but purposeful, her hands steady as she handed out programs. But to the crowd, she was an intruder, a nobody who didn't belong an easy mark for their polished cruelty. As Sophie navigated the crowd balancing a tray of programs, a group of young women in glittering cocktail dresses blocked her path, their laughter sharp and deliberate. One, a brunette with a pearl headband and a venomous smile, snatched a program from the tray, letting it flutter to the floor. "Oops, clumsy me," she said, her voice loud enough to draw stares. "Maybe you're better at sweeping than serving, huh?" Her friends cackled one, kicking the program under a table, forcing Sophie to bend down to retrieve it. The crowd nearby chuckled, some filming their phones glinting. Sophie's hands shook slightly as she picked up the paper, but she straightened her eyes calm. "I'm here to help, not entertain," she said, her voice low but firm. The brunette smirked, tossing her hair. "Keep dreaming," she said, her friends laughing as Sophie walked away, the weight of their scorn pressing against her back. Clue, a 25-year-old influencer with a platinum blonde bob and a diamond choker that screamed, "New fame," spotted Sophie first. She leaned into her clique, a group of women in shimmering dresses, her voice carrying over the music. Look at her, so plain. That skirt, street vendor chic. Her friends giggled, their manicured nails catching the light as they raked their eyes over Sophie's outfit. Chloe pulled out her phone, starting a live stream, her smile sharp as a knife. "Okay, guys, rate this fashion disaster. Made vibes, right?" The comments flooded in laughing emojis and vicious jabs piling up. Sophie's hands tightened on the stack of programs, her knuckles paling, but she kept moving her steps, even her gaze fixed ahead. A middle-aged woman in a sequined gown, her lips pursed, caught Sophie's eye and smirked. "Honey, borrow something decent next time," she said, her voice dripping condescension. Sophie paused, her eyes steady. "I'm here to work, not perform," she said, her voice low but firm. A few guests' raised eyebrows caught off guard, but Chloe scoffed, rolling her eyes, her phone still recording. In the bustling cocktail hour, a man in a tailored tuxedo, his cufflinks gleaming, approached Sophie as she refilled a tray of canapés. He leaned in, his breath heavy with whiskey, his voice loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear. "You know, they hire people like you so we don't have to look at you," he said, his smile cruel, his eyes glinting with entitlement. The guests around him laughed, some clapping their amusement, feeding his ego. "Stick to the kitchen next time," he added, waving her off like a servant. Sophie's tray wobbled slightly, her fingers tightening on the edge, but she met his gaze, her voice steady. "I'm here to do my job," she said, her words soft, but pointed. The man laughed, turning to his friends, but a few guests shifted uncomfortably, their smiles fading as Sophie walked away, her braids swaying, her dignity intact, despite the sting. Max, a 24-year-old trust fund kid with a Rolex glinting under the light, swaggered over his grin. Predatory, his friends trailing like a pack of wolves. "What's this, Chloe?" "The help trying to blend in," he said loud enough for the nearby crowd to chuckle. He circled Sophie, his eyes mocking, his voice booming. "That face, that dress. You're not even trying, are you?" The laughter grew a cold wave washing over her. Sophie's cheeks flushed, her tray of programs trembling slightly, but she held her ground, her posture straight. "What I wear matters less than how I treat people," she said, her voice calm, each word deliberate, landing like a stone in still water. The room quieted for a moment, some guests nodding, impressed by her poise. But Max just threw his head back, laughing. "Oh, please spare us the sermon," he said, his tone thick with scorn, his friends egging him on. Near the Gala's grand staircase, a group of influencers gathered their phones, filming Sophie as she passed with a tray of drinks. One, a woman with a faux fur stole and a nasal laugh, called out, "Hey, budget girl, smile for the camera." She zoomed in her followers, flooding the chat with mocking emojis. "That skirt's giving thrift store clearance," she said, her voice carrying over the music. The crowd laughed, some joining the filming, their flashes blinding. Sophie's steps faltered, a glass wobbling on her tray, but she steadied it, her eyes fixed ahead. "I'm working." "Not posing," she said, her voice low, cutting through the jeers. The woman smirked undeterred and tossed a cocktail napkin at Sophie's feet, forcing her to pause and pick it up. "Clean that up too," she said, her friends cackling. Sophie retrieved the napkin, her hands steady, but her breath hitched a small crack in her calm. Before Sophie could move on, a man in a velvet jacket, his hair slicked with gel, stepped into her path, holding a glass of red wine. "You're ruining the aesthetic," he said, his voice loud, his eyes raking over her stained skirt. "Why don't you scurry back to the staff room?" He tilted his glass, letting a few drops of wine splash onto her shoes, drawing gasps and laughs from the crowd. "There, now you match," he said, his smirk wide. Sophie's tray trembled, her fingers gripping it tightly. But she looked at him, her voice calm. "My work isn't for your amusement," she said, her words soft but sharp. The man laughed, but a few guests shifted their laughter, faltering as Sophie stepped around him, her braids swaying, her resolve unbroken. The cruelty escalated in a flash. Max, emboldened by the crowd's laughter, stepped closer, his hand darting out like a snake. Before Sophie could react, he grabbed her skirt and yanked it up, exposing her to the flashing cameras and howling crowd. "Let's see what budget fashion looks like underneath," he shouted, his smirk wide, his eyes glinting with cruel delight. The room exploded. Phones raised high, capturing every second of her shame. Sophie's hands flew to her skirt, pulling it down, her body shaking, her breath catching in her throat like a trapped bird. Chloe, still live streaming, leaned in her voice, vicious, her phone angled to catch Sophie's flushed face. "Don't dress like that if you don't want attention, sweetheart." The words sliced deep, the crowd's laughter, a tidal wave drowning out the music. Sophie's knees buckled slightly, but she didn't run, didn't cry. She stood there, her face burning, her hands trembling, but her eyes fierce, a quiet storm brewing beneath her palm. As Sophie tried to regain her balance, a woman in a glittering gold gown, her face tight with disdain, pushed past, knocking a glass of champagne off Sophie's tray. The liquid splashed across her chest, soaking her blouse, drawing more laughs from the crowd. "Look at that. She can't even hold a tray, right?" the woman said, her voice loud, her smile cruel. "Maybe you're better at mopping than serving." The crowd roared, some clapping, their phones still raised. Sophie's blouse clung to her skin, her hands shaking, but she steadied the tray, her eyes narrowing. "I'm here to work," she said, her voice steady, each word a quiet defiance. The woman smirked, turning away, but a few guests looked away. Their laughter fading as Sophie stood tall, her strength a silent rebuke. In a corner of the ballroom, a group of young men in tailored suits gathered, their voices carrying as they mocked Sophie's appearance. One, a hedge fund heir with a smug grin, called out, "Hey, charity case, who let you out of the back room?" He tossed a shrimp cocktail at her, the sauce splattering on her skirt, drawing cheers from his friends. "That's an improvement," he shouted, his laugh loud and grating. The crowd nearby joined in their amusement, a cold wave. Sophie's hands clenched her tray, slipping slightly, but she caught it, her eyes meeting his. "Your aim needs work," she said, her voice low, sharp, cutting through the laughter. The man's grin faltered, but his friends kept jeering as Sophie walked away, her skirt now a canvas of stains, her resolve unbroken. At that moment, with the room spinning and the jeers deafening, Sophie pulled out her phone. Her fingers, though trembling, moved with precision as she dialed her voice, cutting through the laughter loud and clear. "Hi, it's me. I was just publicly assaulted and harassed. There are plenty of witnesses." She paused, her eyes locking onto Chloe and Max, who exchanged uneasy glances, their smirks faltering. "Can you come handle this, counselor?" she said, her tone calm but laced with steel, each word a hammer striking stone. The room's laughter died, a ripple of unease spreading like wildfire. Chloe's livestream chat slowed, question marks and confused emojis popping up. Max shifted his Rolex, catching the light, his voice shaky. "What are you calling your mom?" he said, trying to laugh, but his bravado cracked. Sophie slipped her phone back into her pocket, her gaze never wavering, her silence a warning that hung heavy in the air. The mockery didn't relent. Chloe, sensing the crowd's wavering attention, grabbed a glass of orange juice from a passing waiter and with a high-pitched giggle poured it over Sophie's skirt. "Oops, must have slipped. It's just so thin," she said, her voice mocking, her eyes glinting with malice. The juice soaked through, staining the fabric, dripping onto the marble floor in slow, mocking drops. The crowd roared, some clapping, others filming their phones, a constellation of cruelty. Max, not to be outdone, bumped Sophie's shoulder hard, sending her stumbling into the dessert table. A tray of cupcakes toppled, smearing frosting on her shoes. The room's laughter swelling like a thunderstorm. Sophie caught herself, her hands gripping the table's edge, her breath sharp, her skirt dripping, her shoes sticky. She straightened her eyes, fierce, unbowed, a quiet resolve holding her together. The ballroom doors swung open with a force that stopped every sound in the room. A team of bodyguards in black suits strode in their presence like a thunderclap, their eyes scanning the crowd with cold precision. Behind them walked Lucas Allen, a 30-year-old billionaire with steel-gray eyes and a quiet intensity that shifted the air. The crowd parted whispers, rippling like waves as he moved straight to Sophie. He reached her side, his hands gentle as he helped her up his handkerchief, wiping the juice from her skirt with care. The room held its breath, phones lowering, laughter vanishing. Lucas turned to the crowd, his voice loud, clear, and unyielding, cutting through the silence like a blade. "This is my wife, Sophie Allen. I threw it to celebrate her completing her PhD in international law." Gasps echoed, faces paling, the room's energy flipping like a switch. He continued, his tone cold as ice. "Those who mocked, assaulted, and humiliated her are now permanently banned from any event I host. Legal action for public assault begins immediately." As Lucas spoke, a young woman in a sapphire gown who'd thrown the cocktail napkin earlier froze, her phone slipping from her hand, clattering to the floor. "I didn't mean it," she stammered, her voice barely audible, her eyes wide with panic. Sophie looked at her, her braids swaying slightly, her expression calm but unyielding. "Intentions don't erase actions," she said, her voice soft but firm, each word a quiet judgment. The woman stepped back, her face crumpling as the bodyguards moved toward her group, their presence a silent verdict. The crowd watched, some murmuring as Sophie's strength reshaped the room, her words a catalyst for change, turning cruelty into accountability. Max and Chloe dropped to their knees, their faces white, their voices trembling with desperation. "Please, we didn't know." Max stammered, his Rolex glinting as his hands shook, his earlier swagger gone. "Please don't ruin us," Chloe begged. Her phone was forgotten on the floor, her live stream still running, capturing her collapse in real time. Sophie stood beside Lucas, her skirt stained, her shoes smeared with frosting, but her posture was regal, her eyes steady, a quiet fire burning within. She didn't gloat, didn't smile, just looked at them, her silence louder than their pleas, a testament to her strength. The bodyguards moved forward, escorting Max, Chloe, and their click out, the crowd parting like a sea. Their earlier laughter was replaced by a stunned, heavy silence that pressed against every chest. Moments after the bodyguards left, an elderly man in a tweed suit, a renowned philanthropist who'd remained silent during the ordeal, approached Sophie, his hands clasped. "Your composure is a lesson in dignity," he said, his voice low, his eyes earnest. "I should have spoken up." Sophie nodded her hands, folding neatly, her smile faint but warm. "It's never too late to stand up," she said, her voice soft but firm, each word a quiet challenge. The man nodded, stepping back, his face thoughtful as Sophie's presence continued to shift the Gala's narrative, her strength, a beacon that inspired change even in those who'd stood by. The mood in the room shifted, the crowd's cruelty melting into awe, then shame as the truth settled over them. A woman in a velvet dress who'd laughed at Sophie's skirt approached, her voice small, her eyes downcast. "I'm so sorry," she said, her hands twisting nervously. "I didn't know who you were." Sophie nodded, her expression neutral, her braid swaying slightly. "It's done," she said, her voice soft but final, a line drawn in the sand. Others followed their apologies, stumbling, their faces flushed with regret. A young man, a tech startup founder who'd filmed the assault, deleted his video, his hands shaking as he muttered, "I shouldn't have." Sophie didn't respond, just adjusted her skirt, her movements deliberate, her dignity a shield that needed no words. Lucas stood beside her, his presence a quiet fortress, his eyes never leaving her, a silent vow of unwavering support. Minutes after Lucas's announcement, a young waiter, unnoticed during the chaos, approached Sophie, holding out the business card that had fallen from her pocket. "You dropped this," he said, his voice low, his eyes wide with respect. The card read Sophie Allen, PhD candidate, international law, its university logo catching the light. Sophie took it, her fingers brushing the edge, and nodded, her smile faint but warm. "Thank you," she said, slipping it back into her pocket. The waiter stepped back, his posture straighter, as if her presence had lifted him. The crowd nearby watched, some murmuring the card's significance, donning a quiet clue to her truth that now shone like a spotlight, amplifying Lucas's revelation. The gala's atmosphere changed, the air heavier, charged with a new respect that hadn't been there before. Guests who'd mocked Sophie now avoided her gaze, their champagne glasses untouched, their laughter silenced. A reporter from a lifestyle magazine, her notebook open, approached cautiously, her voice respectful. "Mrs. Allen, can I ask about your work?" she said. Her pen was poised. Sophie paused, her fingers brushing a stray braid behind her ear, her eyes thoughtful. "I study how laws can protect the vulnerable," she said, her voice calm, each word weighted with purpose. "It's about justice, not revenge." The reporter nodded, scribbling furiously, her earlier snark replaced by genuine admiration. Sophie's words hung in the air, a reminder of the power in quiet resolve, a beacon for those who'd underestimated her. During a quiet moment, a teenage girl, a +1 in a borrowed gown, slipped through the crowd to Sophie's side, her eyes wide with awe. "I saw what they did," she said, her voice trembling. "You didn't let them break you." "How?" Sophie looked at her, her hands folding neatly, her smile soft but fierce. "You choose what defines you," she said, her voice steady, each word a spark. "Their words don't get to decide who you are." The girl nodded, her eyes shining, and walked away, her posture taller, as if Sophie's strength had woven itself into her. Lucas, standing nearby, watched his coffee cup warm in his hands, his eyes soft with pride, a silent witness to her quiet power. Sophie's presence grew as the night wore on, not through flash or volume, but through the sheer force of her grace. A group of younger guests, college students invited as +1s, gathered near her, their eyes wide with curiosity and respect. One, a shy girl in a borrowed dress, her hands fidgeting, spoke up. "How do you stay so calm when they're so mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the soft music. Sophie looked at her, her smile faint but warm, her hands folding neatly in front of her. "You choose what matters," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Anger's loud but strength's quiet." The girl nodded, her shoulders straightening, as if Sophie's words had planted a seed of courage. Lucas watched from a distance, a coffee in his hand, his eyes soft with a quiet pride that spoke louder than any speech. A few days later, An older guest, a philanthropist who'd stayed silent during the incident, sent Sophie a handwritten note delivered to the event agency. I was wrong to stand by. It read, "Your grace changed how I see strength." Sophie read it at her desk, her fingers tracing the paper, and tucked it away, her eyes distant but warm. The note, simple but sincere, joined the business card in her pocket, a quiet reminder of her impact. The crowd's earlier cruelty, now a fading echo, was replaced by a growing respect, her story spreading through whispers, a testament to her resilience that reshaped the Gala's legacy. The consequences came swiftly, without fanfare, like the tide rolling in, steady and inevitable. Chloe's livestream meant to mock backfired spectacularly. Her followers turned on her, flooding her comments with outrage, her brand deals evaporating like morning dew. A luxury fashion house dropped her as an ambassador, their statement citing behavior incompatible with our values in a single damning line. Max faced a harsher reckoning. His family's business tied to Lucas's vast investments received a call. His father's board membership was revoked, their influence crumbling overnight. The woman in the sequined gown who'd sneered at Sophie's dress found her charity gala invitations descended, her social circle shrinking like a deflated balloon. None faced Sophie's wrath. She didn't need to act. The truth did the work, balancing the scales with a precision that left no room for doubt. Sophie didn't linger in the gala's aftermath. She returned to her quiet life, her studies, her part-time job at the event agency. Her co-workers didn't know about the gala, just saw her as the woman who always showed up early, who organized schedules with meticulous care, who never snapped under pressure. But there was a change in her, now subtle but undeniable. The way she carried herself, the way she met people's eyes. It was bolder, more grounded, like she'd reclaimed a piece of herself. A co-worker, a chatty woman with bright earrings and a warm laugh, noticed it one day as they sorted invitations. "You seem stronger lately," she said, stacking envelopes beside her. Sophie smiled at a small private curve of her lips and kept working, her hands steady, her heart a little lighter than before. A week later, Sophie was back at the venue, not as a guest, but as a volunteer, helping with a charity event for underprivileged students. She moved through the room, her skirt simple, her shoes flat, her braid neat as always. A young girl, maybe 15, approached her, eyes wide with recognition, clutching a program like a lifeline. "Are you the one from the gala?" she asked, her voice shy but eager. Sophie nodded, her smile soft, her presence warm. "Keep studying," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You're enough just as you are." The girl beamed, her shoulders straightening, as if Sophie's words had lifted a weight she'd carried too long. Lucas watched from the sidelines, his presence quiet, his eyes warm with pride. He didn't interrupt, just let her shine, her grace filling the room like a soft, steady light. The gala's legacy spread beyond the mansion's gilded walls, its story taking root in the city's collective memory. A local news outlet ran a feature about a PhD student who humbled an elite crowd. The article praised Sophie's poise, her intellect, her quiet strength. The footage of Lucas's entrance played on repeat, his words a rallying cry for decency. Community groups reached out, inviting Sophie to speak to inspire others with her story. She accepted a few. Her talk is simple, but powerful. Her message was unwavering. Dignity isn't bought, it's alive. She stood before the audience. Her voice is steady. Her presence is a reminder that true power doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to dazzle. It just needs to stand. Sophie's past flickered in small, unspoken moments like shadows cast by a passing cloud. A locket around her neck, rarely opened, held a photo of a younger girl standing beside her parents. Their faces stern but proud, their expectations a weight she'd learned to carry lightly. She'd touch it sometimes, her fingers lingering on the worn silver before tucking it away, a quiet tether to her roots. A phrase overheard at the gala, "You're nothing without a name," made her pause once, her eyes distant, her hands stilling on her braid. She didn't speak of her family's wealth, the disciplined upbringing that had shaped her resilience, the choices she'd made to live simply. She didn't need to. Her actions, her strength, her grace said enough louder than any title or fortune ever could. The mansion felt different now, its chandeliers casting a softer glow, its marble floors warmer underfoot. Guests spoke of Sophie, asked about her, shared her story with a quiet reverence. The staff enforced stricter conduct rules, their eyes sharper, their tolerance for cruelty vanished. New events brought new faces, some inspired by her, their outfits simpler, their smiles braver, their presence a quiet echo of her own. Sophie didn't seek the attention, didn't crave the praise. She just kept working, kept studying, kept showing up. Her plain skirt, a symbol of something bigger, resilience, truth, the unshakable power of standing tall. It's strange how 1 minute can rewrite everything. How a woman in a simple skirt can face a storm of cruelty and leave it silent. Her strength is a beacon in the dark. How the loudest mockers end up humbled, their pride shattered by a truth they couldn't see. Sophie didn't need their fear or their regret. She just needed to stand to speak, to let her grace shine.